So in this session, we're going to talk about the second competency in adaptive leadership, and that is managing self. This competency, of course, is part of the 4 competencies of adaptive leadership through the Kansas Leadership Center as they have applied Ron Heifetz's concept of adaptive leadership to circumstances in organizations and communities, colleges, universities, health organizations, any type of entity that you find yourself in a leadership position or in a position where you can exercise the activity of leadership. The last time we talked about the different components of leadership according to the Kansas situation, and one of those components of leadership, we talked about the fact that leadership is an activity that involves lots of different people. So part of the challenge with leadership is moving forward in leadership no matter what your role, but also managing a lot of the challenges that come. And many of those challenges can be very personal challenges that involve you as an individual, you as a leader in the context of this challenge and in the context of this situation. And so one of the most difficult for people, particularly people that may not hold a seat of authority, is how you deal with conflict, how you make conflict productive. Heifetz likes to say, orchestrate conflict. Conflict is very helpful. It brings heat to situations. And as we talked about last time, the heat in those situations is a really important component of moving change forward. So getting used to uncertainty, getting used to conflict is really important. It's just vital that leaders stay focused on purpose, that they understand that leadership in adaptive situations is about learning. And so all these uncertain, conflictual situations are opportunities for people to learn and grow to move the process forward, because that's the way adaptive changes happen. They happen because of learning, because we don't know the answer, and so you have to figure it out together. And the other piece of adaptive leadership that we talked about last time is the idea of time. Technical problems can be fixed ASAP. Adaptive challenges take time because we don't know the answers. The answers aren't easily apparent. And so as a result, we have to bring people along, help them learn, and help them be comfortable with the situation, knowing that it may take months or even years to work through and make progress around certain really difficult adaptive challenges. But this is risky work. Managing these risks, anytime you have conflict, you have risk to your personal comforts, risk to your reputation, risks in some cases to your livelihood. And so managing these risks is an important component as well. Part of what we talked about as we process leadership and push people ahead around some of these kind of challenges is figuring out how to experiment and to intervene and push people beyond their comfort zone, moving yourself beyond your comfort zone, which means it's not personal. We're trying to make progress here. We're trying to work together. So ask questions, listen. Don't just necessarily come with answers, come with questions, and help in that listening really expand your point of view, expand the level of discomfort. Experimenting beyond your comfort zone, according to the Kansas folks, is what they call knowing your bandwidth, understanding where you fit in this bandwidth. And so if you look at the chart on the right here, this very central situation is you, your values, your experiences, your skills, your family, your preferences, your triggers, understanding the things that you're most comfortable with. But moving beyond your comfort zone means experimenting really around 2 avenues. The avenue to the left here are situational experiments, putting yourself in situations with different ideas, different points of view, different circumstances, different data, things that might make you uncomfortable, situations that are different than what you normally experience. On the right-hand side is pushing around people, around the kind of people that you're not accustomed to, that you don't ordinarily hear from, that aren't part of your network, that you normally may discredit in some cases. And so trying to understand your bandwidth and push beyond both of those situations, I think, is really an important component. Taking care of yourself is something that Heifetz talks a good bit about. It's finding refuge. Leadership will wear you down. It's risky, and progress doesn't happen overnight. We've established the fact that it takes time. This type of leadership and change takes time. It requires continued engagement. It's a marathon and not a sprint, which means that you have to prepare yourself as a leader, which means physically, emotionally, and spiritually, figuring out how you can be in this for the long haul and not get burned out. So the next component of really understanding your part of the mess is understanding this concept of triggers, knowing what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, what your vulnerabilities are, and what triggers you in certain situations. The idea of triggers is one of the most important things, and the way I like to say it is that you know what sets you off, what energizes you, how to deploy yourself to be useful in certain circumstances. And sometimes these triggers can be very negative. You might have a temper. You might retreat into yourself and not talk to anyone. You might run away from conflict. So just understand what it is that puts you in that position, and so that you can do whatever is in your control to put you in the best possible position to manage the people that you have to manage through change. And oftentimes it's about emotions. Triggers are about things that push your buttons and cause you to act out of emotion rather than thinking. It's your sensitivity to the things that people might say or do. How do you manage your reaction? Leadership requires the best thinking and logic, and sometimes you want emotions really not to get in the way. And so using this particular Kansas Leadership Center exercise of understanding what triggers you and what's the value, what value is that trigger connected to? What's the core part of who you are that's connected to? So taking the time to take stock and understanding yourself is really important. And this is a really good way for me to understand triggers. This comes from Viktor Frankl, who wrote the really famous, he's a Holocaust survivor, wrote the really famous book, Man's Search for Meaning. And he talks about this concept, this space or this gap that exists between stimulus and response. And this is a time of thought and choice. You can't choose what's going to happen with a stimulus. That's your trigger. That is innate. It's something that might be physical. It might be very emotional. But your response really is where you have your opportunity for growth and where you as a leader have the freedom. So it's between stimulus and response, in this space, that's your power to choose your response. In your response lies your growth and your freedom. And this gap really is where you are able to truly exercise leadership. And so understanding this is a really critical piece. And another piece of this that's very difficult sometimes as you manage yourself through change in leadership is figuring out what others say about you. And many times this is very difficult because sometimes people say things that you don't want to admit, you don't want to hear, you don't want to listen to, you don't want to try to process. You want to channel it out and say, oh, they're just crazy. But really and truly understanding what others say about you helps you to be able to step away from the action and try to gain perspective. And it's not necessarily that you have to change. What people say might actually be crazy. It might actually have no merit. You may be completely in the right on a lot of things, and they are in the wrong in some things that they are saying, but it's still being said, and it's still part of the story. It's the story of the situation, of the change, and of your leadership. So it's not so much about changing as much as it is about knowing what's being said and how that factors into your work as a leader. And lastly, I think it's important to understand that as you deal with very difficult adaptive change situations, one of the most important things that's going to come up is a clash of values. You're going to find situations where multiple of your values are in conflict, and you have to elevate one over others that you might care about almost equally. So you have to really take stock of what it is you value, and that's where that exercise about your triggers comes down to many of those things that you value. And understand that your values really equate to the time that you spend on things, the effort that you give things, and the resources that you give things, whether it's you as a leader, your organization, your unit, whatever it might be. But understand that in these kind of situations, sometimes you have to make a choice between competing values, and those competing values may all be very relevant, but sometimes to move things forward, you have to choose one over another. And so rationalizing and understanding and being prepared for that is a really important exercise in knowing yourself. So the third of these presentations will be on energizing others and engaging others in this work.